Hey everybody, welcome to the RealTuners podcast. We're a little dumbed down today due to some technical difficulties, but we are working and we're going to have a good night and do a tech discussion for you.
All right.
Thank you, Scott. So this is Bill Fowler. I'll be acting as a little bit of master of ceremonies this evening. We've got some of our usual hosts online, Mark Dahlquist with Throttles Performance, Scott Evans dialing in from beautiful downtown Las Vegas. I apologize for a little bit of noise on my end. I'm calling you from the lovely Phoenix Airport, which I'll be in a quieter moment here in just a couple of minutes. The great news tonight is that we have Earl Schexnayder online. Earl is a multiple drag week competitor, multiple racing competitor, and all-around transmission expert. So one of the things we want to do right out of the gate tonight is start talking about your transmission questions, things that you've always wanted to know but have been afraid to ask about all different kinds of transmissions, torque converters, power management through transmissions. So with that, Earl, would you be willing to introduce yourself a little bit to everyone listening to RealTuners podcast tonight?
Yeah, I'm from Lafayette, Louisiana. I have Schexnayder Racing. We specialize in 6, 7, 8 second, 9 second, whatever street cars. And I know everybody wants to know a lot about the 10-speed and 8-speed transmissions, but we have not messed with any of those yet. 6R80 stuff, a lot of that stuff, 6L80, 6L90. Mostly for drag week stuff, it's going to be Power Glide and Turbo 400 stuff. Seems to be in 4L80. Seems to be pretty reasonable, but the most durable one would be the 400 and the Power Glide. What kind of questions?
So, Earl, you mentioned for drag week about the 400 and the Power Glide. And a question that comes up a lot is, for someone who's looking to make that choice between a Glide and a 400-based transmission, how do you recommend people look at making that kind of choice? What are the determining factors as to whether it's better to go Glide or 400?
Well, mostly it's weight and type of power adder, like turbo, blower, nitrous, stuff like that. Light car, you definitely want to go Power Glide. Heavy car, big tire, and 3-speed, it'll definitely help you. But it just depends on how much power you're making, how much weight you drag, and how much durability you're looking for.
So when you talk about that weight, is there kind of a shorthand that you would use? Is it like 3,000 pounds or 3,200 pounds? Obviously, that varies a bit based on, as you mentioned, the power adders, but is there kind of a point at which people need to start thinking both ways and then go through the further discussion?
Yeah, I mean, anything more than like 3,400 pounds, I would definitely go 3-speed. And if you got a small cubic inch motor, you'd probably want to stay 3-speed to keep it in the power range. Power Glide is your most durable transmission you're going to find. Or you have no issues with it. You can run drag week, whatever, drag month, and never have any problem. The Power Glide is just a bulletproof transmission. The 400, it's a real nice piece, but it has more moving parts, more stuff to break. So it's kind of a toss up. I like the 400, but it's not as durable as the Power Glide.
So traditionally, guys built transmissions based on factory cases, but now we've got aftermarket cases like the Reed case, for example. What's your opinion on where guys should start considering, spending the extra money? Because they're not a cheap date to go to that Power Glide case or the 400 case, or now the 4L80 aftermarket cases.
I love the aftermarket cases. Anything over 1,000 horsepower should have an aftermarket case because you only got one set of feet. And people don't want to put transmission shields and blankets and stuff in these cars. And I see it all the time. They're running a 400 stock case and it blows everything through the floorboard of the car. So, and when somebody's going to lose a leg or a foot, it's going to really hit home,
Yeah, we
that's
had
certainly.
we had a good.
I've actually. Go ahead, Scott.
I was gonna say we had a good buddy of ours down there when I was working down there with Earl. That was he built a car for somebody. The guy didn't want to put in a case or a shield. He just wanted him to race with the stock 4L80 transmission, and he let off the trans brake, and it launched and it blew up, and he told us that he thought he lost his foot because his shoe came off and hit him in the face, and he was for certain that his foot was still in there. He got lucky. It just broke his ankle and mangled him up a little bit. Got real lucky.
Yeah, he could pass his helmet through the floor, through the hole in the floorboard.
Yeah, and we've discussed safety before on RealTuners. How everyone wants to do the minimum safety required for some reason, and this is just one more example of just try and be safe because you can get hurt, without even realizing you'd be hurt, and it's just bad.
Well, everybody takes it for granted, and they just stick the transmission and never give it another second choice or thought, and then they really think about it when something comes through the floor.
So, Earl, we've got a guy, James McEwen. I hope I pronounced that right. He says, hello, all from the AT207-11 automatic transmission class. They've got 14 students listening in live as they are building and assembling transmissions in Lincoln Tech in Grand Prairie, Texas. So we might have some students building transmissions asking you questions here.
Okay.
Boy, that's awesome, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in this evening. It's an honor to have a whole classroom full of folks. And thanks to your instructor for putting you guys online to hear all of this. So, I think we've all had experiences, at least seen people have negative experience with trainees blowing up. So, Earl, getting a little further into this, some of the big power cars now are running 400s, two-speed 400s. And help our audience understand a little bit why the decisions are made to go to a two-speed 400 versus a glide, and kind of, again, where do you start making those kind of decisions?
Well, a two-speed 400, it's kind of a waste. I mean, you can use a 148 first gear, whereas in a power glide you can get a 158 first gear in it, and you'd be a lot cheaper going with the power glide than trying to do a two-speed 400. It just, to me, I don't see the logic in it, but all the 400s we do, I have one right now, a two-speeder I got to rebuild, but the three speeds are heavy cars, big power, and something that you want to run multiple classes like small tire and big tire. I can run the 3-speed and use first gear with big tires and use the leave in second gear for small tires without having to change the gear ratio and stuff. So it makes it more versatile. But you can get away with it way easier with a power glide than a turbo 400, 2-speed.
That's a very handy kind of change to be able to make. So along with that, one of the other things that people always struggle with is a starting point on a converter. Now, obviously, they want to work with their transmission manufacturer or maybe a particular converter builder. What advice do you give to people who are trying to figure out what's a good starting point based on a particular combination? Like, let's say you're doing the deal with a single turbo LS, and you're going to make, let's say, 800 wheel or something like that. How do people start to look at that?
Well, it's all about experience and what you've been using. I mean, even for Scott, he had a twin turbo LS. We picked him out a converter. That's something that we used over years and years and years, and it's just been improving and improving every year. And we stuck it in his car, and he went 8 O's with it, And it's just one of those converters that really, really works. And BTE makes it for me. And we use it in a bunch of different configurations, but we change it up. Sometimes they need a little bit more stall, a little bit less stall, but you got to have a baseline to start with.
Hey,
and
Scott Evans, check the messages.
I don't even know if I can see the messages.
Keep going, Earl.
Well, you got to start with one converter manufacturer, whatever you're going to use. If you're going to use a Neil Chance or a Pro Torque or PTC, you stick with them and give them all the information you can. And for them to get it right on the first time is very unlikely. I mean, usually you have to send it back a couple of times. It's hard to tell people that, but most of these guys think they can just buy a converter and first shot to put in there is going to be perfect. You can if you ran that same combination before.
So typically, in your experience, so you get the converter, you've given them all the information, you get as close as you can. For a guy to dial in a car, what's the reasonable expectation of the number of times that thing is going to come in and out to get it close, assuming you're able to go to the same track and repeat some of the other elements? Because obviously if you're going to different places and different conditions and different tracks and different tires, that all throws that out the window. But
exactly.
what's the best way to get that kind of situation dialed in?
You have to have good data. You have to have a data logger or a good EFI system that can data log every run where you can compare everything. You need to see how much shift extension you have, how much it drags the motor back down on shifts. So if you just rely on somebody to tell you what the tach's doing, you'll never figure it out. You got to have real data that you can go back and look at.
Yeah, I think all of us that have used data loggers or doing EFI with data loggers, the first thing we find out is the throttle position sensor truth machine. It's like, I didn't lift. Well, yeah, you did. That sort of thing. So that's part of that process. You mentioned Neil Chance and PTC and some of the other great builders out there, Pro Torque. Similar kind of question. Everybody has seen the bolt together converters, and yet obviously those are a great deal of money. When do you suggest people consider bolt together versus a conventional converter that has to be cut apart to be make changes?
Well, once you have a combination figured out, then you can get your bolt together. The bolt together is to make small adjustments, and if you're going to race a lot, you will have to take this thing apart every so many months and look in it, because you'll catch a bearing going bad or something. If you catch it, a fin cracking or something, you can catch it before it destroys the whole converter. So you can send it back, get it repaired. But if it's just a bearing or you want to clean it, you can do it yourself and saves a bunch of money. If you ship the converter back, it's $200 to ship it overnight or something. So if you got to ship it overnight to Neil Chance and get it back again, you're going to spend $400-$500 in shipping. You're way better off just buying you a good converter that you can do it yourself.
So that raises an interesting point. So for guys that are looking at that do-it-yourself thing, how do you manage a converter and a transmission program like that for folks who might not be as sophisticated yet to be able to make those decisions? What do you suggest, or how do you like to manage that for your customers?
Well, we usually go to the track with them, look at the data, and then we'll if we can change a stator and change RPM, a couple of hundred RPM here or there, a pump or something, and I'll deal with Marty or Joe or anybody, whoever we get the converter and stuff from. We usually have 2 or 3 stators for each converter, so we can change stuff back and forth. And you got to have some kind of way to experiment with it. You can't. It's not written on the wall that says I need this pump, this stator, this turbo, whatever, and stick it in there. It's going to work. It's all going to work, but will it be perfect for your combination? No.
So something else that we're talking about, obviously, kind of implicates is that you need to be able to get the transmission in and out of the car fairly easily, fairly quickly.
Turbo cars are pretty easy because you have no exhaust back there. So transmissions R&R is pretty simple. A lot of these guys do it at the track.
What do you do about cooler and cooler lines and that sort of thing?
I run the biggest cooler we can put, and we use like it's a 40 pass cooler with the fan built on from I can't think of the name of it right now. The rail, yeah. It's a 40 pass cooler. It made a big difference in all our vehicles we've tried it on.
Scott, can you repeat that brand name again for everybody?
Derail.
Derail. DERALE.
Got it.
Derail.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a few minutes ago, we were talking a little bit about torque converter maintenance and being able to open it up and take a look to see if a fin is cracked or a bearing is going bad. Um, what do you suggest people do as an ongoing thing to make sure their transmission, nothing is going wrong with it? After every event, what should they kind of go through the checklist to make sure everything is healthy and working properly?
Every event, if we run them real hard, I change the fluid in every one of them. Drop the pan. If there's anything going on, you'll see it. I mean, if there's brass in the pan, if there's plastic in the pan, which shouldn't be much plastic in a race transmission, but brass, aluminum is usually from like aluminum stator or something in the converter, sprag tearing up something, and you'll find little bearing material and stuff like that. You want to catch it before it turns into a major ordeal. And fluid is cheap. Change the fluid every race. You go out there and make 3 or 4 qualifying runs, 3 or 4 rounds. That's 7, 8 passes. Change the fluid, especially on a turbo car.
At possibly 200, 250 degrees sometimes. So it's...
Yeah, 300 degrees easy.
Yeah, and the converter's hotter than that.
Oh, yeah. Converter will get 500 degrees real fast.
So we have our first question from the from James McEwen's class. Question from a student class: 3,400 pound 2002 Camaro nitrous car, 650 horse, turbo 400 built or a 4L80 built for daily driver with rear gear accordingly. Which would you prefer?
Daily driver, I'd go with the 4L80. I mean, I'm assuming he wants to drive this thing on the highway. It's going to suck driving 45, 50 mile an hour on the interstate.
What about a 400 with a gear vendors?
That's the way to go. 400 with a gear vendor. That's what I have in my car. I mean, they got plenty of guys going 6s at 200 mile an hour with that.
So that raises an interesting sort of question. There's been a lot of debate about power consumption of transmissions, particularly a 400 versus a 4L80. What is your experience? And does a 4L80 in fact take a lot more power to turn than a 400?
It has a little bit more rotating weight, but not a lot of drag. We've changed from 4L80 to 400 and really never noticed anything in a typical 9-second car, you know? So the thing is with the 4L80, nobody made a good enough input sprag in the overdrive section to handle the power like a 400 does. So they are strong. I mean, they got plenty of people running low 8s, high 7s with 4L80s in a relatively heavy car, 3,400 pound car. So they work great. They will break more than a 400.
And the heavier you get with the car, the easier they break. So some of these guys, 4,000 pounds, all the new cars start out around 4,000 pounds. New Camaro has like 7 layers of floor, so it's super heavy.
So Daniel Brummett wants to know if there's any downfall to running twin coolers instead of a single.
No, you can never get the fluid too cool. I promise you.
And then Tony Gagnon wants to know, what kind of fluid do you prefer? Is there a brand or a type of fluid that you like over the other?
Well, if you got a typical turbo car that you're going to run a lot and change the fluid a lot, I just use a typical, you can get a parts house, Dextron 6. Because you could change it in every weekend. So it's not a big thing. If you have something that you're going to run a lot and not change it, just maintenance and inspect it, that lat racing oil is a really, really good stuff. I mean, I don't know how many people have heard of it, but I use it in my car. It's a phenomenal oil in the transmission. Everyone I've taken apart, the transmission still looks brand new after, half a season of racing.
So I'll ask the tricky question. Have you had experience with some of the synthetics that are sold by a variety of the manufacturers? Any opinion on those?
Well, I got a lot of guys that run raw purple, red line, stuff like that. But that stuff is so expensive, you're not going to want to change it every weekend. They just typically run it until they have a transmission problem.
So you mentioned the Dextron. Oh, go ahead, Mark.
Well, just Matt Aruda wanted to know tractor fluid versus ATF. And he's talking about like a pure hydraulic fluid versus ATF with the friction modifiers.
I mean, tractor hydraulic fluid is great for tightening up loose converters, but it doesn't have the lubricating properties of ATF. So it's still not a great thing. I mean, we mix them. We'll go like half and half or something. Some people run it pure, but then when they wonder why all the needle bearings and bushings are wiped out of the transmission, that's why.
So that sounds like a no.
Well, it's great for if in a crutch if you're trying to tighten up a converter, but it's just a crutch.
And some guys are saying high guard, which is I think the John Deere and the Caterpillar label.
Tractor oil.
Yeah. We've used it all. I mean, we've used it all. That lat fluid is about the baddest stuff I've ever seen. I'm not going to lie. It is phenomenal. And when you drain it, it still looks clean, beautiful. You know,
LAT is Lubrication Advanced Technologies, and they use some pretty wild engine oil too.
The question
they
is,
have great engine oil, transmission oil, gear oil.
The question is, if you're going to change it every race, is it expensive?
Nope.
Yeah, you don't want to pay $20 a quart if you're changing it every race.
Exactly.
Right. I just want to make sure people understand
synthetic oil you can get at Walmart and change it every weekend.
Yeah.
So along those lines, any preferences? The traditional Power Glide runs a screen, lots of choices when you're in a 400 or other transmissions. Do you have a preference around what you do with the filter in the transmission?
400s, we always use a screen style filter. Don't use a traditional like a paper filter. It doesn't flow enough oil.
And so therefore does that apply to pretty much any transmission?
I mean, you kind of limited when you get to like 4L80s, 4L60s, unless you custom make your own filter for it, you know.
So speaking of which, we've covered coolers a little bit. We've covered, the filters, the fluid recommendations, those items. Anything else that people really need to be thinking about to keep the transmission alive?
Never throw it in neutral through the traps. A lot of people, I've seen this years, and I've done it years and years ago, run through the traps and shove it in neutral and shut the engine down. Well, you're looking for an explosion because you're going to overspeed the drums in this thing and blow them through the floor.
Unless it has a clean neutral valve.
Unless it has a clean neutral valve body, like a Turbo 400. My car has a clean neutral. Once you go first, second, and third, you can pull it all the way down the next notch, and it's clean neutral.
Can you explain that just a little bit so people understand what the difference between a regular neutral and a clean neutral is?
Well, it's keeping the clutch pack engaged to where it's not just going to take the high gear drum and what happens, it overspins the high gear drum so bad that it just makes it explode. So this clean neutral, it lets the engine slow down, but it kind of keeps all the transmission engaged.
So in other words, that is how a 400, the power path in a 400 operates. What about a Glide?
You still don't want to put it in neutral because you start overspinning the high gear drum in neutral.
Just think of it this way. When you throw it into neutral, suddenly it's spinning the drum twice as fast as it used to be spinning. So if you were at 8,000 RPM, now all of a sudden that drum is at 16,000 RPM.
Yeah, not a good thing.
Something I'd like to add to, from a safety standpoint, is my experience is a lot of people like to use push lock hose with their transmission cooler lines.
Oh, big no.
And that's a big no-no.
Big no-no.
I prefer the Teflon lines for transmission cooler because they take the temperature, they take any kind of pressure, they have better flow. There's less internal resistance in a Teflon tube. Just use a Teflon line braided hose. If you're using a flex hose, use the Teflon line hose. It's a safety item.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people, and I did it too. I was guilty. I got the black braided hose, and on a turbo car, that's a big no-no. It will melt off in a second.
Yeah, you get a trans really hot, that stuff just melts right through.
And I've seen the push lock stuff actually push right off of the barb.
Yeah.
After it gets enough passes on it, it'll just push right off. And when you oil down the top end, under a pair of 14-inch wide slicks, that's not good.
No, it's not going to be fun.
Pretty much always recommend AN fittings or PTFE fittings, something that has a secure locking threaded end to make sure it does not come off the transmission or the cooler.
And like burnouts on a Turbo 400, if you have you do burnouts, when you get in the water, you want to start your burnout in second gear. Go from second to third and just kind of power out of it. But if you go from first to second, you bang the sprag so bad on the animated sprag that it won't take many burnouts and it'll be broke. So start off in second, shift to third. You're not killing the transmission like that.
Are there any similar things you'd recommend with other popular transmissions? We spend a lot of time on Turbo 400s and Power Glides, but what about some of the other 4L80? Exactly the same thing?
Yeah, 4L80, you want to do it the same thing. Start off in second and shift the drive. And just kind of power out your burnout. And just don't let the tire just stop instantly, you know.
How about some
So what about some
AOD
of the
stuff?
Ford transmissions or the Chryslers?
Chryslers, they'll make a big hole in the floor quick if the low reverse sprag goes out in them, and especially like neutral them in high gear, like at the end of the traps, and doing burnouts. Any transmission really, if you just overspin it in the water in first, second, and third, it's not good. If you do it from second to third, you have a whole lot less rotating mass going opposite directions. Because you got a drum that's spinning 7,000 RPMs in first gear. When you shift it to second, it's got a dead stop and go the opposite way. So that's not good on anything.
No, that makes complete sense. I'd like to ask a quick follow-up question on that hose piece. When we mentioned the black hose, we're talking the sort of nylon lightweight hose.
The lightweight nylon hose. It's no steel braid in it whatsoever. It was just nylon hose and with rubber. And this stuff melted off and so fast it wasn't funny.
That's great to know. Are the Kevlar type hoses or the ones that may be black on the outside but have the steel mesh in them? Those are okay.
Yeah, as long as it has steel mesh in it, it'll keep it from. What happened? I tried that. I thought it was all the same stuff, so I plumbed it all up in this nice black braided hose, and we just spooling it up in the staging lanes, checking a few things, and next thing you know, the whole thing's on fire because the lines just melted off and fell on the ground.
And this was from the heat of the fluid, or was this from being near the turbo plumbing?
No, it is just from the heat from the fluid.
So when you're talking about a turbo car, Earl, do you have any type of strategy with your converter dump valve, or have you run converter dump valves before?
I haven't run. I'm fixing to start experimenting. I have a 400 we're putting dump valves on right now, and we're going to start experimenting with it. But the stuff I've seen lately, if they dump too much out of the converter, it overheats the converter. And then when you dump it back in there, it's kind of a shock to it. Sometimes it starts cracking fins and stuff. So there's a happy medium there. You don't want to dump too much out of it.
So we've been talking about temperature and the idea that you can never have the temperature too cool. Where do you like to measure the temperature in the trans just to know what's going on? You measure it in the pan?
Yep.
Okay. Some people talk about measuring other things, and in these days and age of CAN buses and the ability to have a lot of sensors, do you like to data log line pressure, or are there other things that you can measure if the
we monitor line pressure and we monitor coolant. I mean, the transmission cooler line pressure, and we check it against line pressure too. If you monitor line pressure on a car that launches real hard, you'll find a problem. If you like, you have a problem with uncovering the filter on the launch, line pressure will start falling off on the launch and then come back up. So then you can fab you up like a baffle or something in the pan, or a filter that can catch further to the back of the pan. That way you'll prevent transmission damage for sure.
So that raises an interesting question about fluid levels. What's your approach to getting the right fluid level in any particular transmission?
Most of them are a quarter inch above the pan rail, but some of these high revving deals, you might have to add an extra quarter oil just to keep it happy Like we always monitoring like line pressure. Well, on the launch, if it goes like 110, 112, 60 foot, and you see a line pressure goes from 220 down to 175, you know it starts for all for a split second. So we'll put another quarter all in and see if that takes care of it. If that doesn't take care of it, you have to make a baffle system inside the pan to keep it happy.
So we have touching on the burnout sequence. Mark Schlottman wants to know, how would you make that work with an auto shift valve body? Even with a shifter in second, he starts in first, and all you can do there is take it easy on it until it gets into high gear, and then let it eat.
Yeah, just take it real easy. Once you get in the second gear, then you can hammer on it.
Yeah, just do it not quite rolling into it hard. Just kind of keep it like a part throttle till the tires are up fast enough for it to shift.
And then Kenny Howard wants to know, at what power level or RPM would you consider it a requirement to switch to aluminum drums and hardened shafts?
Anything over 650, 700 horsepower, flywheel horsepower, it's time to start getting better drums and shafts for sure.
Yeah, and I don't know if we can answer Camaro Mike's question. He's having a problem with his 2017 Camaro SS. The torque converter clutch solenoid is stuttering at low paw speed. In traffic, easy push on gas pedal at 40 to 90, it shakes. The dealer says they will have a new fluid in January to fix the problem. He also said the trucks have it bad. I don't think that that's really anything we can do anything about if GM is releasing an updated fluid.
Exactly.
Yeah, you might be able to push where it locks up at to a different speed and take care of that, but GM probably doesn't want to change their transmission tuning because that's what makes it live as long as it does in a factory stock vehicle. So,
well, also then they'd have to recertify with the EPA,
right,
and they'd have to recertify the advertised fuel economy as well.
Right. So while GM solution is fluid, you potentially might be able to raise where it locks up, and it may be happier.
Yeah, but
what transmission was that again?
Avoid your warranty.
Well, that's a 2017 Camaro, so that's going to be the 8-speed, isn't it?
Yeah, it'd be the 8L90. Yeah, I didn't catch what vehicle it was in. There's some torque converter settings in the tune you can actually manipulate also that will, apply that a little better as well. But
that's got more gears in it than a Ford Modular has timing chains.
Yep.
Oh, now, the good news is with the 10-speed transmissions, I'm hopeful that we can get away from all of this brand this and brand that because, very soon here, everybody's going to have the 10-speed, and it's pretty much all the same from what I understand. So
I had a 10-speed once. It was a Schwinn.
Yeah.
I knew that was coming.
I wonder how much time is involved in all that shifting.
Hey, Earl, do you have any tips or tricks for a 6L80, getting a 6L80 to work right?
Man, 6L80 is very, very critical on the tuning. That's the biggest problem with them is people get in there and they start changing all kind of stuff, and they don't know what they're changing.
And they also have to do a relearn that they don't know about.
Do I?
Maybe James Short can expand on that.
Yeah, there's a big relearn that you have to do when you change stuff too. If you do too much, that will make it live longer. And most people don't know about that. They just, I'm going to change this setting, it'll be better, and it doesn't.
Yeah, I'm actually walking through Walmart Christmas shopping right now, but I'll comment a little bit on that. The biggest thing is the torque values from the engine side of the tune. If the torque values that are delivered are completely off, it's going to throw everything off on the transmission side because all your line pressures, your shift timing, clutch application, and deactivation is all based on the torque value delivered from the engine. So, whenever people go in and start scaling tunes and it jacks all that, background torque calculation up, which really throws off the shifting on those transmissions.
Yep, that makes sense.
So coming into this show tonight, we talked a little bit about, we're going to focus mostly on kind of the drag week transmissions. More and more guys are doing stuff with the new ones, and we just, had the 6L80 conversation. Are you seeing much in the way of people trying to run anything newer than like a 4L80 or, God help them, a 4L60?
4L60? No, I work on those daily. I wouldn't
You can't
attempt
build
drag
them
day with
strong enough.
those.
I love that. And so you're working on them daily to keep them alive. I'm just fun.
Yeah. Oh, I get at least 2 or 3 dropped off every week. They're a great transmission for everyday transportation, but they're not great for hot rods.
I thought the competition with the 4L60 was to see how many neutrals you could have.
Oh yeah, they got it hands down.
I bought a bone stock truck that had 4 neutrals in it, or 5 neutrals in it,
Yeah.
actually.
Hey, I'll say this. My wife's 2004 Tahoe has 222,000 miles on it. It's the original 4L60.
Oh, I've seen Robbie. His
I
little
think
truck
it's got to
went
be a world
200.
record, isn't it?
Well, my guy that works for me, he had 280,000 on the original 4L60.
That's amazing.
Yep. I mean, every time we'd ride in this thing, I was waiting to start walking.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got to bring your walking shoes every time you get in that truck or car.
Oh yeah.
We talked a little bit about gear vendors. You have any tips or tricks for people? You know, everybody talks about gear vendors being unbreakable. I, unfortunately, from personal experience, can tell you it is possible to hurt them by doing dumb things. Any advice for people about making their gear vendors live?
Man,
Proper lubrication is a
vendors-
big thing.
it either works or it doesn't work. You know, I mean, if it goes to slipping or something, it's done in no time. But I mean, I have one and Scott rode in my other car too with it. We run it 7,500, 8,000 RPM, click the gear vent on and let it rip, and never had a problem with it. You know, but some people, it doesn't take. I mean, they can break an anvil with a rubber hammer. It doesn't take much.
A lot
Yeah, I
of
heard
that has
once
to
somebody-
do with making sure it has good lubrication. You know, one of the big problems is people don't follow the instructions that they tell you. Hey, you must do this, you must do that, you must put it in this way. It must have these specs and these tolerances. And some people just slap them on.
Yep.
There's a thing to be measured. You know,
definitely got to measure and make everything fit.
and
So,
while they can try to make
Andy
it for
Netherland-
everybody.
Andy Netherland wants to know, he's got a 3,300 pound, 1,400 rear wheel horsepower turbo drag weight car. Would a Power Glide or Turbo 400 be better for reliability?
Reliability, it's a turbo car.
Yeah, 1,400 rear wheel horsepower drag weight car,
How much weight?
3,300 pounds.
Well, I'm 3215, and I've been beating the crap out of my Power Glide, and it's holding up great. And I put a
I don't
lot of
think you
miles
go wrong
on
with a
it.
Power Glide. They make a shorty Power Glide kit with the gear vent is actually only 3 inches longer than a regular Power Glide.
Yeah, the short gear vendors.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a very compact package, and it makes it a hell of a lot easier. That's what I have in my drag week car.
Jared-
What I also
Jared-
learned, go ahead.
I was going to say, Jared Hicks, you missed the part where we talked about you can't have too big of a cooler or cool enough transmission fluid. He wants to know if in a race application, if you have any issue looping the cooler lines and not running a trans cooler with a JW case Power Glide. And, well, yes, it's called very hot fluid.
Yeah, it'll be very, very hot. Better have better than a 300 degree gauge.
Yeah, you'll go through a lot of parts real quick on that transmission with it being that hot all the time.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, this kind of goes back to the idea of having an aftermarket case. You know, you're just asking for trouble with a situation like that. And you know, we're all trying to save money and do this and that, but you know, that never pays in the long run.
Well, I mean,
Earl,
if they're driving it
go ahead.
dragging it to the starting line and just cranking and doing a burnout and making a pass, it's still going to get hot as hell. So having a cooler would definitely help.
Any strategies that you recommend? You know, we've talked quite a bit about turbo cars and so forth, and obviously those are the ones where staging is kind of a critical thing. You know, how long are you on the trans brake? How long are you this? Are there things that you recommend people driving the cars for trans that you've prepped that they do to make them live longer and still be able to deal with the turbo staging?
man, it all comes with just lots of trial and error, and you definitely want to kind of judge how the other guy stages. You don't want to just be hung out there for 10 seconds on the trans brake. I mean, that's going to do just tremendous damage.
So obviously, watching the other person, seeing if you can stage second, paying.
And I'll go talk to them. Whoever I'm racing, I'll go talk to them and say, look, does your car spool up? Does it stage good? Whatever. I want to know. I mean, if it takes him 5 seconds to get it spooled up, I'm gonna let him go in first or whatever. And that, because I know mine just goes in and you deck it and it's on the 2-step.
Jason Robertson, what temperatures are safe? I like to keep mine under 200 degrees, but I know that in some drag race applications you're going to see 250. But the higher the temperature that it runs, the better the fluid you're going to need.
Exactly. Typically on drag week, I see mine at 250 all week, but we try to keep it under there. 250, 240, we steady rolling. And we try to get it cooled down. If it gets around 290 or something, we'll stop and let it cool off or whatever. But we try to keep it in the 250 range.
I usually stop at 250. I try not to let mine be above about 220.
Yeah, and I mean, it depends on what fluid you have too. But I mean, ideally, if you can keep it at 170, it'd be great.
Darce Laws wants to know if a glide is more reliable than a 400. Why not do a glide in the gear vendors? Would that still be less money? 3,700 pounds and 2,000 horse drag kick application.
I think glide is your most durable transmission you have. If you do it right and put like the Turbo 400 output shaft and the big 1 3/16 input shaft and 10 clutch drum and Sonax planets, you can overbuild it, but you'll never tear it up.
What about the fact that he just said 3,700 pounds, though? Is that pushing kind of where he needs to switch to a 400?
You borderline right there, but look, even my little white car is 3,600 pounds with a 302 and a power glide, and it flies,
So Chase Griffiths expounding on that wants to know what's the point of going to a 2-speed turbo 400 then?
That's a waste of time. And it costs more money.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, there seems to be a number of people that are going that route, and people talk about strength. It's just hard. It's hard to know. And speaking for myself, I have no experience with doing that. I just went directly to the glide approach. But
hey, Bill.
Obviously, some people are making money selling those. Yes, Mark.
Am I allowed one more coyote joke?
Why not?
Absolutely.
Well, because poor Bill Barning, he says he's been seeing more Turbo 400s behind Coyote Mustangs, the S550 chassis. How are they holding up? Well, the Turbo 400 will take like 2,000, 3,000 horsepower. So there isn't a Coyote on the planet that's going to hurt one.
I'm wondering now. You've got me wondering what they run in Matusek's car. I
know. I'm. By the way, guys, I'm only joking. I really do know what they're capable of. I'm only joking. I like to tease.
No worry, Mark. We know. And anyway, Earl, we did say that we're looking at kind of these traditional drag week style transmissions. If you're kind of looking at this with where the future seems to be headed, are some of these other more modern transmissions, are we going to start seeing more of those at some of these events?
If we can keep them together, that's the next thing.
Because a lot of guys are running. We're seeing a few more late model cars creeping in, thanks to Dodge sponsorship. We're seeing lots of Dodges at Drag Week, and obviously they're running their. Gosh, I think it's a 7-speed transmission. I'm not sure.
That's going to be a mess. Dodge is not the greatest on transmissions.
Just wanted to hear you say that. Sorry. So we talked about the glide. You mentioned one of the pieces of advice I got from Rick at Gear Vendors is after each race, open up the screw in the reservoir, take a little fluid out. If the fluid is changing color, change the fluid. I mean, the nice thing about a glide is they don't take much, or a gear vendors is they don't take much fluid. And I was using mine at a little bit after the 1,000-foot mark at a quarter-mile track because the car would pick up both ET and mile an hour, even though I could just get right by the top of the rev limiter going through the lights, in second with the glide. But it actually picked up both by using the gear vendors. But that was his advice.
Yeah, maintenance people. I can't get people. They'll spend $100,000 on a car, but they won't maintenance. You tell them they got to change oils and fluids and stuff, just like an engine oil filter. They go run their $50,000 engine and never take the oil filter off and look at it. Every race I go to, I take the oil filter off and look at it.
Can highly recommend the Clearview filtration filters for that reason also, because you can see when something goes wrong.
Okay, so I'm going to step in it here, but I've run a System 1 for a long time because it's easy to inspect the element on those.
Same concept. You can see what you can see.
I mean, my System 1, I just take the cap off and pull the element out. I mean, if you look in the cap, you can see right away if you got a bunch of metal shavings in it.
Yep, sadly had that happen too.
Yeah. But I'd rather catch it with a few metal shavings than it be full to the top.
Yeah, it's an early warning system, just like we were talking about. I haven't had a chance to run one of those pretty full view ones, but those look nice.
Yeah.
Oh, they're clear. It's awesome. It's well worth the money.
It's a lot better to only have to take 10 off the crank than to have to replace the whole crank.
Yeah.
That makes good sense.
I mean, it's $150 to get them to clearance 10 off for a cheaper crankshaft place, and new crank is $1,000. So take your choice. Same thing happens with transmissions.
You either want to do it or not. I mean,
you can either replace a bunch of parts in the transmission, or you can see when it starts to make stuff and stop and pull it out and only have to replace one little thing.
Yep.
So one of the other parts that you read about a lot these days are the roller bearing tail shaft housings. Is that something that you recommend for transmissions? And again, is there a point at which you would make that recommendation, Earl?
I mean, the roller bearing is a nice deal, but you got to make sure you put the matching yoke for it. You have to use a nitrated yoke. If you use a regular yoke, it'll start pitting and tearing it up.
We put one of those in my transmission. I don't know what difference it makes, but it was hey, you're going to make power, you need a rollerized transmission to help parts out, make them live longer.
Yep. It beats the hell out of a stock old 50-year-old tail housing, with a Babbitt bushing in it.
So you mentioned yokes for a second. What do you recommend, for people, again, with yokes? I see a lot of people run around with kind of stock stuff. And do you automatically recommend that everybody go to at least 1350 U-joints along with that sort of change?
Yeah, forged yokes and 1350 joints. And you have a lot more insurance than regular 1310 and 1330 joints and cast yokes and stuff. They break that. And they don't realize when they break a dry shaft off, 90% of the time they break the damn transmission off the engine block. So it gets costly in a hurry.
So in other words, once again, we're talking relatively inexpensive parts, which create a lot of insurance and save a lot of problems for people. So all y'all listening out there.
And since we're talking about if you're going to break a drive shaft, put a $60, $100 drive shaft loop in the car, because that keeps the thing from slinging around too much, which means there's less forces on the tail of the transmission, which means there's less yanking things around. If you can keep it, even if it breaks, at least if it stays in its place mostly, you're not slinging all that mass somewhere else to break other parts.
Yep. And it's just basic safety then.
Not to mention you don't want it coming through the floor either, just like you don't want parts of your transmission coming through the floor.
Yeah, we hate it when that happens. Speaking of which, when people are sizing, most of these cars, people are putting different parts in and everything is moving around, so you can't just assume drive shaft length. What's your method for making sure you've got the right length drive shaft in the car?
Well, I'm not a drive shaft technician, but I'll call like PST. They have a chart and they have lengths, critical speed lengths. So if you know you're gonna turn the engine, say 7,500 through the traps, you need a drive shaft that's good for 7,500, and it'll tell you what if you need a 3-inch, 3.5-inch, 4-inch drive shaft, and it'll tell you the critical speed of it. So the best thing to do is get with somebody like PST or the drive shaft shop or something, and they can recommend the exact drive shaft you need. Don't just pick one out and say, I need this one.
So I was thinking particularly about, yoke depth, how much there should be in terms of, how far the yoke goes down onto the output shaft.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're going to order like from PST or anybody like that for dry shaft, they give you specific dimensions, measure from the seal in the Power Glide or the 400 to the center of the yoke on the 9-inch, okay, or 12 bolt. And they have everything. If you look online, their farm have every measurement you need. And if you do it like that, it'll come out dead on every time.
It also needs to be measured with the vehicle sitting on the ground so the suspension is loaded, because as you drop the wheels down, when you lift the car off the ground, it pulls that yoke out of the transmission. And if you measure too long, now suddenly you're jamming against the back of that transmission and you'll break parts in the transmission.
Yep.
So at the other end of things, when we're talking about bolting the converter to the flex plate and then getting it, I think everybody has seen 101 things about how many clicks you need to make sure a converter is fully seated in the transmission.
And it still can't get it right, believe me.
Any tricks for that?
Man.
Spin and push and jiggle.
It's just a lot of working with it, but you need to do a measurement. If you think you have it in there, you do a measurement how far the flywheel is from the block, and do your measurement from how far the converter is from the face of the transmission. And I mean, if the converter is only in a 1/2 inch and the flywheel sticks out 3/4 inch from the block, it's not going to go together, partner. So don't put it up there and put an impact in it and bust it in place because you just bought a pump.
If you can't push the transmission on the back of the engine by hand and spin the converter freely,
exactly.
Stop.
Yeah. I get guys, they buzz the pump every freaking week.
Well, we've
they
had
put it in
guys
with the impact every time.
Break the case because they put it on and it wasn't all the way in, and they tried to impact the case down onto the engine and it just broke the case.
Yep. Hey, 2 things they cannot do. I don't care how many times you explain to them: shim a converter and set the shift linkage on the transmission.
So let's take those one at a time. Let's talk about shimming the converter. How will they know they've got that right? We've just heard that you got to be able to get it on by hand and have it seat all the way against the block or the block plate and still spin the converter. How do they know they got the converter the right depth into the trans?
Well, if its converter's bottomed all the way out in the transmission, you don't want to pull it out more than 1/8 of an inch. 125. I try to shoot for 100 thousandths. Because if you pull it out too much, you don't have enough engagement in your pump gear. But if you pull it out 100 thousandths and put a washer between it and the flywheel, you're golden. And as for the shift linkage, everybody adjusts the shift in park. Who gives a damn if it's good in park? You need to make sure it's good in first, second, and third, where you're going to be 90% of the time. So you put the shift all the way in low. You put the transmission in low. Make sure the little deal slides in and out the shift linkage. Put it in second. Make sure it slides in and out. Put it in third. You're not too much worried about reverse and park and neutral. You're never there. But first, second, and third, you're always in there.
Yeah, the idea is that you want The idea is that you want your shift linkage on the transmission itself, the little lever, to sit in its resting position in those gears without any tension forwards or backwards. So that when you pop the shifter in there, it's exactly in the detent where it's supposed to be to fully engage everything in that transmission for that gear.
What about Power Glide? What about Power Glide band adjustment, Earl?
It goes according to valve bodies, most of them are common, 3.5 turns. You tighten it up 80 inch pounds, back it off 3.5 rounds. And that we typically do those every like 50 runs or something like that. You'll adjust the band. Now, if it starts acting stupid and wanting to rock on the trans brake and stuff, you might want to do it before that. But typically, they can go at least 40 to 50 runs before you need adjustment.
Just to clarify, you said inch pounds or foot pounds? Because I know some people are going to hear it differently.
No, inch pounds.
Inch
80
pounds. So I wanted to make sure that people hear that. Inch pounds, not foot pounds. Don't grab your big torque wrench. It's the little tiny one with the little tiny measurements.
Yeah, because foot pounds, they're going to need a new case.
How many ugga-duggas is an inch pound?
Just a bump. Just half a ugga-dugga.
Yes, we're getting down to the precise measurements and all of that. Do you have a preference with shifters to use with either glides or turbo 400s or some of the other transmissions used for racing?
The M&M shifter it's a real nice shifter. I like the TCI and
The Outlaw.
the Outlaw TCI shifter. We have that in quite a few cars.
Yeah, and
It's
everybody
real
has
positive shifting.
You got to remember that everybody has different things that they do with their shifters. So the way the gate works, it has to feel comfortable to you. Some of it is personal preference. You know, if you sit in somebody's car and you push their shifter around and you don't like how it feels, it's probably not the shifter for you. Try and see if there's another one that you like. A lot of the higher dollar ones do a great job. They're all fairly similar. They all accomplish the same thing, move it from gear to gear. But it has to be comfortable to you, and that's important because when you're racing, if you can't get your hands on the thing and shift it to the next gear, you can't win a race.
Exactly.
Watching some of the TV shows, I've seen a few people that, famous street outlaw guys who seem to have shifters that are barely attached to the car. That makes me crazy. Is that a problem or is it just me?
Well, as long as the detent works on the shifter and everything's right, it's not a big problem. But
It's only a problem
see
when
what
you
you're
wreck
talking
the car
about.
and it comes loose and swings around and hits you in the head. It's more of a
That's not
safety
good.
issue than a transmission problem.
And another thing, make sure the shifter cable is mounted to the transmission, not to the body of the car.
Yep. Everything flexes. It's not going to be the same.
I fought that already with a guy. He kept saying every time he let the trans brake go, it would shift the second by itself. I said, it's impossible. It's a manual valve body. Can't do that. Well, after he brought the car and started looking at it, he had the cable mounted to the damn body. So
Is this a guy
when
with
you
a block
launch it,
plate?
once you launch it, the engine would move and it would shift it.
I love that. I've made a million mistakes. I haven't made that one, thank God, but lots of other ones. Although I've heard of other people having mystery shift issues, especially when they go to a block plate or block plate mid plate and they don't have anything that locates the engine and transmission longitudinally in the car and everything just moves around. Mystery problems. Earl, what have we missed? I know you've got a family obligation coming up pretty quick here. What is something we've gone through a lot of questions, and for those of you that we had the late thing, you'll be able to hear on the rebroadcast what the early questions were. What have we missed here? What are the things that you see most when people bring in transmissions and they're having problems? What is it you see the most of?
Well, I'm sure Scott can answer that. He's seen all the problems we had come in over the years. He was here, so.
Yeah,
Oh, you mean with Scott's car?
No, with everybody's car.
Well, I got to get off here, fellas. I got to go to school, pick up my daughter.
Earl, thank you very much for being on tonight. We appreciate all the insight and the expertise. We look forward to having you on down the road a ways, and we look forward to seeing you at the next drag week.
Thanks.
We'll definitely be there.
It was nice to meet you.
All right, Bo. See y'all later.
Take care.
So,
you were saying, Scott?
You were asking about other problems that we've seen, and a lot of things we see is people don't check their fluid after they fill up a transmission, right? And so they don't have enough fluid in it. We've had numerous amounts of people come in and going, oh man, the thing, it just shifts lazy, it doesn't shift right, and we get to looking at it and we realize that they're, a quart and a half low or something. They filled it up and they checked the dipstick, but they checked the dipstick in park, or they check it and, they haven't put it through the gears and actually checked it again after they've done it. So one of the common things that I'll do is I'll fill it up, and then I'll start the car up and let it run for a second, and then I'll shift into first, and then I'll shift into second, and I'll push it through each gear so that the fluid can get through the valve body, because all that empty space has to burp out any air that's in there, and it needs to clear all that before you can know exactly how much fluid you have. When you switch to the next gear, it keeps fluid in those passages. So there's quite a bit of space in there. So you go through it all, and then you check it, and you look at it, and then shut the car off and let it sit and let the converter drain back into it for a little bit. Then start it up again, run it, push it through the gears again, and then look at it again, because now you're getting burping air out of the converter as well and burping out of other places. So people just pour in fluid, oh yeah, it looks good, and they start driving, and then they're low on fluid and they burn up the transmission really quick. So that's one of the more common things that we saw with people bringing stuff in. We have
And then it
to
sounds
touch
like,
on
shifter adjustments. Oh, go ahead.
yeah.
To touch on one with the 6L80 stuff, fluid level is a big one. I got my little one screaming at me. Run those things a quart over full.
Yeah,
especially if you're racing. That's a big common issue with the 6L80, 6L90 stuff. Guys will have an instance where the thing won't shift right at high RPM, and it's because it's starving of fluid. So
yeah, the hard part with those is actually filling it to that extra quart, just because it fills from the underside while the engine's running, while the pump's going. It's a weird thing to fill, and you got to use a squeeze bottle or a pump with pressure to push it up in there. So it's a little weird to fill
you're
it.
right.
And then you got to be quick about getting the thing on.
To run it through all the gears and get it to its resting level, because it obviously has to be up to temperature and all that stuff too for the GM side of it. And then once you get everything to the level of GM, basically dump another full quart into it. That's how we do it.
The other thing that we found is, people have this problem with, we all agree that it's really, really dumb to just start your car and immediately rip on it and run as hard as you can, because you don't have any fluids up to temperature. While you can't truly have the fluids too cool, there's still a point where you still need to have the fluids moving, and the materials inside the transmission need to have some temperature in them before you beat on it. While the fluid is going to remain reasonably cold, there's still got to be some temperature there. You don't want it negative 20 degrees out and you're beating on it with a fresh crank, just like you wouldn't want to do that on your engine either. There's something to be said about getting at least some heat in the fluid before you start beating on it.
All right, good advice. James, anything else that you've seen with a lot of the newer transmissions? Because you do a lot of work on the HP tuner stuff and the stock ECUs, which will tend to be cars that have those. Other things that people tend to miss that cause problems?
Not really. I mean, the biggest problem is getting cars in that have already been modded prior, and somebody's already jacked the tune up and baked the clutches in the transmission, and having to try to band-aid a mechanical issue, with tuning only. And, it is what it is. Those things are really easy to burn up. So it's really meticulous to keep fluid in the transmission for one, the quart overfill deal, especially with torque converters and, cars that are making a little bit more power. And then obviously, making sure the thing isn't slipping because the tune's jacked up. So.
Hey, Scott, while we've got a break here, it doesn't sound like we have any more questions that have been posted up yet. Do you want to talk a little bit about this class schedule?
Sure. So coming up here, you want to learn how to tune stuff? We got some classes for you. We've got a couple of different classes happening all across the country. You can see them on the RealTuners website as well, so you can just go there and click on it. We've got, I think, starting in January, the first class is Mopar Dodge Factory ECU Tuning with Rick Tapp from Trick Pro Motorsports. I know we have Also in January, I think we got Busher Racing in Norwalk, Ohio. We got a standalone EFI class. January 19th and 20th there. In February, I know we have here in Vegas, we have Revolution Streetcars here in Las Vegas, February 23rd and 24th. We're doing a standalone EFI class. Let's see, what else do we have here in moving up through the months? March, Dynacom Industries, Fort Worth, Texas, RealTuners Advanced Holly EFI one-day class. This is a special short class for advanced stuff. You've already been through the basics. You need a little more. You want to know a few more of the fancy tricks in the ECU. That's the class to go to. Once again, March 2nd in Fort Worth. Looks like April, there's one coming up out in Springfield. That's a two-day advanced class, April 27th, 28th. And I think we got April 13th, 14th, the level 1 class in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So hopefully it's warmed up there and there's no more snow on the ground by the time that class hits. I know it's cold up there sometimes. I think that gets us through April, and then I know we've got some in May, and also another one in May in Springfield. And then it looks like June there's an advanced class as well for all those guys up there in Milwaukee who take the level 1 class. You want to go to the advanced? We got one June 15th and 16th. So I think that covers most of the ones I see on the schedule right now. Tell your friends, tell your family.
Yep.
Discounts for
Telephone.
small groups of people.
Yeah, and let's talk about the Las Vegas one for a little bit.
Yeah. Las Vegas one is going to be basic standalone EFI. We cover all the stuff that works on probably 95% of the ECUs that you can put on your car. I'm sure there will be things that it doesn't cover, but we cover most of the ones that you want. We talk about the basics of installation, configuring it before you fire it up the first time. We talk about some basic wiring things that you need to know. We're going to talk about the importance of syncing the crank timing and making sure that everything is right before you start beating on it. We'll talk about power tuning, a whole bunch of other topics. There's a dyno there, so it's up at Revolution Streetcars, which is the north end of town near the drag strip. It's literally like a half mile from the drag strip on the same inbound road towards the drag strip once you get up there. And February 23rd, 24th, that's usually when it starts warming up again out here. I mean, it's not really cold, but we're the chilly part of the year right now. And it starts warming
There's
up.
going to be
then.
there's a good possibility there's going to be more RealTuners people at that event than any other one altogether.
It sounds like several of us, myself, I'll be there because I live out here. I'm sure that several other people will show up as well. I think Bewley was talking about coming out, and maybe you were talking about coming out, Mark, maybe?
I'd like to. It depends on how things shake down, but I'd really like to go to that one.
Yeah, it's going to be a great class, I'm sure. We'll have plenty of people who can chime in on topics when you have questions, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, other than going out to dinner, I'm looking forward to going there. That's about what I can add to the benefit is ordering food, but that could be fun too. Mark, any other questions or anything we need to get to before we wrap up?
There's a couple of follow-up questions on some stuff, but someone wanted to know if there was a aftermarket pilot tube to help run a cord over on the transmission. And then go ahead.
So all I've ever done with that is you just got to use a pump and push it up in there because it's literally like an open bung tube in there that it just kind of overflows into it. I mean, you could probably take the pan off and modify that to stick up further. But I've always just used a pump, and you just pump an extra cord in there because it'll keep going.
Just get the plug in.
Yeah, and it'll drip out a little bit, but just hurry up and get the plug in. That's make a little bit of a mess, but that's all I've ever done. I mean, it's going to make a little bit anyways because it's usually you fill them up until it starts running back out, and then you let it settle, and then you put the plug in. It doesn't drain so fast that you can't put more in. I mean, it's a pretty small hole.
Daniel Brummett wants to know if the podcast will be every Wednesday still. That is our plan. However, we've got Christmas and New Year's messing with the schedule, so we're probably going to take a couple of weeks off.
For sure
but,
next week, because it's definitely
yeah,
Christmas.
for sure next week.
Yeah, and if we decide that we'll be back around just after New Year's, we'll let everybody know well in advance. But at the moment, looks like the plan is to give a 2-week break, and we'll have the best of RealTuners up for people to listen to who want to do that.
Or I might just play holiday music.
Ooh. Baby, it's cold outside.
Yeah, baby,
Absolutely.
It's cold outside.
It's my favorite song.
All the different versions that there are as best we possibly can. That would be perfect. All right, guys. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in to episode. Gosh, what was this? 68, 69?
I thought we were 70, maybe. I don't know.
Maybe 70. Yeah.
Let's
So
see. We
anyway,
can find that out.
We're looking forward to a heck of a new year. Lots of classes, lots of great podcasts coming up. We're going to be alternating Q&As because we hear a lot of good feedback around the Q&A, so we'll be continuing to focus on that. And don't be afraid to post Q&A questions on RealTuners fan page ahead of time so we can make sure we get those questions or bring in some experts to answer those. So post your questions, keep that active. We look at it all the time, and we'll answer online, but we'll also queue some up for the podcast in the future. So with it, Scott, will you take us out?